What is up, Dan and Amy? Yesterday, President Obama makes his farewell address from Chicago and didn't mention much about Chicago. I didn't hear you're doing a heck of a job, Rami. I didn't hear that.
Yeah, he didn't get a standing O. He didn't single him out.
I heard how America is allegedly better and stronger than it was 8 years ago, but I didn't hear that specific to Chicago. I mean, such a celebratory mood with all of the potentates and members of the Vanguard class in attendance at the McCormick Place last night. And why not celebrate how they scale this successful governance model here nationally to generate the kind of success at the national level that we enjoy here in Chicago?
Well, he said that, some Americans aren't better than other Americans. Dan, don't you know?
We should reject the first dawning of every attempt to alienate any portion of our country from the rest.
Yeah.
Or to enfeeble the sacred ties that make us one. America, we weaken those ties when we allow our political dialogue to become so corrosive that people of good character aren't even willing to enter into public service. We weaken those ties when we define some of us as more American than others. When we write off the whole system as inevitably corrupt.
Do we weaken those ties, Mr. President, when we refer to half the nation as deplorables? Do we weaken unredeemable? Do we weaken the nation, Mr. President, when we refer to people who disagree with us on matters regarding climate change, what should be done about that issue, tax policy, healthcare policy? When we refer to them as bigoted neo-Luddites, which is essentially what he said, when he referred to people who reject science and reason. He's talking about people who disagree with him.
Mm-hmm. Well, I saw you last night on CBS 2 with Erica Sargent.
Yes.
Giving your response to President Obama's farewell speech.
So you watched the president's farewell address tonight. What did you think about his speech?
I mean, it's a speech, we've more or less heard before. It was kind of a quasi-State of the Union. It's struck a lot of the same notes in terms of things he says he's accomplished. Some veiled shots at those who disagree with him and have disagreed with him over the past 8 years. The moment when he addressed Michelle, the moment when he addressed his daughter, I think those are authentic moments. They are poignant moments. I think it's a nice family. I think he's a good husband and a good father, and she's a good mother, and the two girls seem to be like budding superstars. I think that's real. But in terms of his politics, no.
And then she fell off the chair.
Yeah, I had even stronger language than what CBS played, and I just mentioned, against the backdrop of the, in raw numbers, the violent crime capital of America, and the 116th ranked city out of 116 cities in a FiscalTimes.com study in terms of fiscal stability, cities with more than 200,000 in population. Chicago's 116 out of 116. So I guess it's a perfect backdrop for President Obama to talk about his fake accomplishments at the national levels, birthed by Chicago as he was, just as we hear routinely from Tiny Dancer and the political class here about their fake accomplishments in Chicago. For more on this, more perspective, we're joined by our friend Charles Thomas, ABC7 political reporter. Charles, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Hey, good morning. Good morning, guys. Always good to be here.
Good morning. And so I know it was like a pep rally atmosphere at the McCormick Place, and I appreciate that most members of the Chicago Press Corps were able to keep their weeping to a low blubber as President Obama announced his departure. But what about that? What about the failure to really address the state of affairs in the community he calls home?
Well, it's almost Orwellian that he would do a speech like this in a place like Chicago, Illinois, because if you talk about dysfunction, we got it, not only on the city level, but also on the state level. So he comes to his home state to give this speech to talk about all that's been accomplished over the past 8 years or the previous 8 years. And he's doing it in a place where, if anything, we've gone in the opposite direction. Keep in mind that Barack Obama has a built-in legacy. He is the first African-American president. People will be talking about him for as long as there are students of American history. He'll always have a place. I think he's very concerned about that being the only part of his legacy. So he's almost obsessive at this point about reminding people about the accomplishments of his past 8 years. But again, to do it in Chicago, wow. When you think about, as you mentioned, the violence, when you think about the political dysfunction, the fiscal problems, and to be the first African-American president to come to a place that has the highest black unemployment rate in the country, speaking of Illinois, and very credible studies, and a place where you have this epidemic of violence that is, as you mentioned, the violence capital, murder capital of America, and not to mention those things during the speech. Again, it's almost Orwellian in scope, because you're just flying in the face of reality. You're manufacturing your own reality in that regard by not mentioning those failures, really.
And we can't, forget about that horrific video that came out just last week showing 4 African Americans beating up on the white mentally challenged student. I mean, I was thinking that he would call for racial harmony and that we need to get along. We need to accept the incoming presidency.
I think he alluded to that in his speech, that African Americans have to begin to think about the other side. They have to think about this not just in terms of their own problems, but in the problems of America at large. I think he did mention that, and that stood out to me when he mentioned it. I don't know if any other people really grasped that, because he was basically saying to black Americans, you've got a ways to go as well in terms of trying to understand what's happening in this country.
Well, it's interesting. Also, just again, choosing Chicago, there's obvious reasons, and then some complicated challenges, like where Chicago finds itself, where Illinois finds itself. But also, with respect to some of what he had to say, Chicago is one of the few places he can go where Democrats are still relatively energized, because he finds himself being the head of a Democrat Party that is in the super minority nationally. It is where Republicans have been in this state for so long, demoralized and in an insular minority. That's what Democrats are nationally, except in places like Chicago.
Yeah, but I don't think a lot of Democrats at this point, Dan, really understand that. I don't think they get that yet. I mean, I think that a lot of Democrats at this point still can't get their arms around what happened in November, and that's a hangover that just hasn't subsided yet. And I think you certainly felt a lot of that last night. I felt a lot of the same vibe in that room last night that I felt at his acceptance speech in 2012 and in Grant Park in 2008. They just haven't at this point gotten their arms around what they're going to need to do to rebuild themselves yet. I mean, the Democratic Party right now is still a bunch of scattered lifeboats around a sinking ship, and they're trying to figure out a way to regroup.
Well, the other noticeable omission as he was, going down his kind of federal team and his family, of course. But the notable omission is great to be back home. No mention of Tiny Dancer.
Really, the little guy.
What about giving a little shout out to the little guy? What about Tiny Dancer? About Rahm and Amy Rule? They were there.
Wow! Isn't that something? Yeah. A guy I did a story yesterday, a preview piece, and I basically had a young African-American man on the South Side talking about how Obama's presidency has been mostly symbolism and no substance. He said that on television and put it in my piece at 4, 5, and 6, which I thought was a little different. It was a different perspective. But this guy also told to me that he reminded black Chicagoans that Barack Obama's legacy in the city of Chicago is Rahm Emanuel. He gave us Rahm Emanuel, and without Barack Obama, there would be no Mayor Rahm Emanuel. And he's absolutely true. That is the one legacy that he has in the city of Chicago. And this whole business of a $1.1 billion CTA grant to rebuild the whatever parts of the CTA, that's going to help Rahm Emanuel in his quest for a third term, because now Rahm has control of $1 billion worth of patronage that he can throw at the and whomever. Wow, which is going to make him even more difficult to beat in 2019.
Hey, from your sources, are you hearing do you have some names of possible people running against Mayor Emanuel?
I haven't heard about too many. I haven't heard a lot about that at this point. I mean, of course, I'm looking like everybody else, but you hear about Tom Dart and some of the stuff that's going on polling-wise, showing Tom Dart perhaps beating Rahm Emanuel in a 2019 election. But then you also hear about these new slams against Tom Dart, these problems that he's having at the jail. I wonder if that's a coincidence or whatever. But
made up problems.
Yeah. Well, you had a few thousand people at McCormick Place yesterday cheering the demise of the city of Chicago. So I mean, perhaps the cheering will continue.
Well, they got the band back together one last time.
I guess.
Let's see if they can still play.
All right, he is.
Oh wait, we didn't ask him. Were any reporters crying in the media? area?
No reporters cried last night.
Okay.
There was. I remembered some crying back in 2008.
Oh, so do I. I was there too. A lot of people crying.
Yeah, but I don't remember too much crying last night. I think again, a lot of people are still trying to get their arms around. Let me say one more thing before I leave. I think that a lot of Barack Obama's legacy, whatever that is or will be determined by Donald Trump and Donald Trump's presidency. If Donald Trump can truly, put this in quotes, make America great again, then I think Barack Obama's legacy will become more of a Jimmy Carter kind of legacy. But if Donald Trump's is a one-term train wreck president, then I think Barack Obama is going to come off looking real good in that regard. So let's see what happens.
All right. He is Charles Thomas, ABC7 political reporter. Charles, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.